Hi guys, it's Maisha from ACE Academy. Since the O-level exams for 2023 are just around the corner, it's time that you all start doing the past papers. For that, ACE has decided to solve a series of past papers with you. Today, I'll be solving the economics past paper for summer 2022 variant, paper 1, variant 2, or paper 12. With that being said, let's get started. Okay, question 1. What is an example of a free good? So a free good is a good that is unlimited in supply. Your options A, B, and C all are limited in supply. You have a limited number of defense workers, education providers and institution, healthcare service providers and institution. Therefore, none of these are unlimited in supply. So D, sunshine, becomes your only answer possible because, sunshine is unlimited. You don't really have to produce it. It's given free it's a natural resource that's given for free, right? So that. Question number 2. A student has nothing to do on a Friday evening. She withdraws $5 from the $100 she has in the savings account and buys a present to take to a party, to which the admission is free. What does this involve? An opportunity cost equaling to $95 is your option A. Is it true? No, because she ended up not using the $95. She only used the $5 from the $100 and left the $95. Therefore, the $95 don't have an opportunity cost to begin with. So A is not the answer. B, an opportunity cost equal to the other goods she could have bought for $5. This can be your answer because she made the choice to use the $5 to buy the present to take to a party. Therefore, there would be an opportunity cost where she could have bought some other goods that equal to $5 except the present, right? So B can be an answer. Just to double check, number C is no opportunity cost as the entrance to the party is free. This is wrong because even though there is no admission fee for it, she still has to buy the present for which she has to take $5 and she made that decision. Therefore, there would be an opportunity cost involved. The same explanation goes for number D. There would be an opportunity cost involved because she did spend the $5. Okay, so the answer is B. Number 3. The diagram shows two production possibility curves for a country. Okay. What might cause a shift from point K to point L? So this is the initial curve, and this is the shift, the curve after there has been a shift. So there was an outward shift or a rightward shift going on. Okay. A change in what the consumers wanted to buy. This is wrong. Why is it wrong? Because if there was a change in what the consumers wanted to buy, K would have just moved along the single curve, right? K would have either moved more towards consumer goods, or if people wanted to buy more capital goods, K would have moved towards the capital goods. It would not have shifted outward. A recession. Since it's an outward shift, it cannot be a recession because an outward shift implies that there has been an increase in the country's production possibility. Therefore, a recession would be quite the opposite of what's happening. C is that there's going to be more investment. Does this make sense? It does. If there is more investment, a country would have more production possibility, would have more possibility for production going on. Therefore, there would be an increase or an outward shift of the curve. Not only so, if the investment happened more on the consumer industries or industries which produced consumer goods, then K would have very likely shifted to L. So C makes sense. D is that the use of previously unemployed resources are being now used, right? So why is this also wrong? And a lot of people and a lot of students get confused on number D specifically. So the reason why D is wrong is because if there was unemployed resources, K would not have been on the production possibility curve. Instead, it would have been anywhere within the curves. Since it was not within the curve, all the resources have been already used at maximum efficiency. There was more production possible. Therefore, the number of resources has increased. Not that there were unemployed resources which are now being used, because that would have implied a shift from anywhere within the curve to K and not from K to L. So that's why D is also wrong. The answer to this question is C, more investment. Which relationship would be studied by an economist specializing in macroeconomics? Macroeconomics deals with, the entire country or the international trade or things that are larger in scale than microeconomics, which is the counterpart, or which is quite the opposite, where microeconomics deals with individual consumers, individual firms, individual choices, etc. Okay, so A, the relationship between the inflation rate and the unemployment rate. The inflation rate is something that tackles or caters the entire country, and unemployment rate is also the same. It's the unemployment rate of the entire country, not of a single firm. Therefore, both of these components are part of macroeconomics, so A can be an answer. B is the relationship between the output of a firm and its cost of production. It's a single firm, so it's microeconomics. C, the relationship between the price of a product and the quantity demanded by a consumer. Again, it's a single product and it's a single consumer. It's microeconomics. D, the relationship between the wage rate of workers and demand for labor in an occupation. It's a singular occupation, so it's also microeconomics. So your answer for number 4 would be A, inflation rate and unemployment rate. Okay, cool. Number 5, in recent years, a government has started to make more use of the free market system. However, they're doing it very slowly to avoid the disadvantages that a free market system might bring. What is the possible disadvantage of the free market system? A free market system is essentially a market system where there is little to no government intervention. So it's more reliant on the price mechanism, on the consumers and on the suppliers, on the demand curve, on the supply curve, and not the government, nor the government aims and incentives. So that's a basic understanding of what a free market system is. A is that there's going to be a decreased incentive to work. Is this true? Not true. Think about it. If you as a producer and a consumer are in charge of the free market system, you're more likely going to be thinking of personal profit. If you're going to be thinking of personal profit, that would vary into how you would set the prices, or the prices would be set within the market. Therefore, since there's going to be profit incentive working, people would be more active or more looking forward to working more or being more productive, because now they can get higher rates of profit or higher profit margins that they otherwise would not have gotten. So A is wrong. B, decreased levels of pollution. First and foremost, if there is a decreased level of pollution, it's not a disadvantage at all. It's an advantage that happens. So even if, let's say, this was true, which is not, in a free market system, since there isn't government intervention, there would be higher levels of pollution. But regardless of that factor, even if this was true, it's not a disadvantage, it's an advantage, and therefore B is not the answer. C, increased efficiency. Just like the first example, this is something that will depend on will happen because the consumers and the producers, and producers specifically, will have profit incentives. So they would have incentive to be more efficient with resource allocation and waste management. Therefore, it will increase efficiency, and this is something that is going to happen. Unfortunately, however, this is a advantage that comes out of the free market system and not a disadvantage. So your answer would not be C. Lastly is increased inequality of income. If there is little to no government intervention, it means that there's not going to be minimum price, maximum price floors, subsidies and taxes, etc. Therefore, it's going to be easier for people to set up monopolies in industries. It's going to be more easier for people to set out target pricing, etc., etc. It means that people who are going to have higher profit margins would end up benefiting more and more as time goes on, and therefore this would increase the inequality of income. Therefore, D is your answer here. Number 6, what will cause the demand for a curve for a good to shift to the right? All right, this is a very important question because it combines a lot of different components of your syllabus together. It combines shift, the difference between a shift and a movement. It combines the difference between complementary goods and substitutory goods. Therefore, to explain this, we would want you to have a better understanding of this question. And this is a question that students often get confused on. All right, so what will cause the demand for a curve for a good to shift to the right? The first thing that you need to know is what is the difference between a shift and a movement. All right, for that, let's move here. So for a movement, which is basically this, is that there's a change in price of the good specific, right? So therefore, a movement, the point, which is, let's say, from here, moves to over here. And this is what that happens in a movement. A shift, however, is when the entire curve moves at every price point. So this curve, let's say, does not exist anymore, and this is the new curve, the new demand curve that happens. A shift happens when there's a changes in the non-price factors of demand, the non-price determinants of demand. For example, that could include the price of another good, the demand of another good, a natural disaster that's happening in the area or the country, etc., etc. Right? So that's the first understanding that you need to do, that this is what a shift looks like, or this is what a shift specifies. What happens when demand specifically shifts to the right? If demand shifts to the right, there's going to be a higher demand, right? So it means that at a certain price point, if previously you got a quantity at Q1, you would now get a quantity supplied at Q2, which is a greater amount or a higher amount of quantity that you're getting for the same price that you're paying. Therefore, demand, the more the demand increases, the more you're getting per price point. Therefore, per unit cost of the product or the good is decreasing, or price is decreasing. All right, so that is what is happening in this question that they're talking about, this specific stimulus that they're talking about. Now let's discuss the answers, right? So a decrease in the disposable income of consumers. If there is a decrease in the disposable income of consumers, it would mean that consumers are less able to buy. And if they're less able to buy, they would be less able to demand. They'll be less able to demand. Therefore, the shift that would happen to the left instead of the right. Demand would decrease instead of increasing. B, so A is not the answer. B, a decrease in the price of a complementary good. Now, what is a complementary good? The word complementary means aiding or facilitating something. So a complementary good would be a specific good that would complement the sale of the base good, or the good specified in the question. Therefore, if there is a decrease in the price of a complementary good, as price decreases, the demand would increase. People would want to buy more of the complementary good. And if people wanted to buy more of the complementary good, the higher demand, there would be a higher demand for complementary good. A higher demand for complementary good would mean a higher demand for the base good. An easy way to think about this is if the price of if the price of milk decreased, people would want to have more milk tea. So there would be a higher demand for milk. If there's a higher demand for milk, people would be more able to buy tea. Therefore, if the base good was tea and the complementary good was milk, a decrease in price of a complementary good would lead to a shift to the right of the base good. So B can be your answer. Now let's move on to C. A decrease in the price of a substitute good. What is a substitute good? It's a good that would hinder the sale of the base good. If you use the same example, if your base good is tea, your substituted good might look like coffee, right? So if there's a decrease in price in coffee, let's say, people would want to buy more coffee. If people buy more coffee, people would not want to buy more tea because they already fulfill their need with coffee, right? So there would not be a greater demand, there would be a decrease in demand, which would mean that there would be a shift to the left instead of the right. So C is also not your answer. D is a decrease in the price of a good. This is immediately not the answer because they're talking about the price of the good specifically. Why is this not the answer? Because they're talking about a shift and not a movement. Therefore, a price factor would not cause a shift in any curve. Therefore, D is not the answer. Your answer, therefore, is B, a decrease in the price of a complement. All right. In the diagram, which demand curve has perfectly elastic demand? All right. The answer, if you know what perfectly elastic demand looks like, it's a very simple question. The answer is a D. But for people who cannot really remember the diagrams, how would you maneuver this question, right? It's very simple. If they're talking about perfectly elastic, it has to be completely straight. Either it would be vertical or it would be horizontal. Whether it's perfectly elastic or perfectly inelastic, it would be either horizontal or vertical, right? So A and C are not your answer. Now they're talking about elastic demand, right? Since they're talking about elastic demand, think about this. What does price elasticity of demand look like? It means that if there's a change in price, how would the demand change? How would the demand change, or how would the demand respond to a change in price? Since they're talking about elastic, so it's perfectly elastic, you do understand that there would be a significant change in the demand, right? So if we take B as our first possible answer, if there's a change in demand, for example, price change from here to here, does quantity change at all? The quantity is fixed over here. Whether the price is at this level or the price is at that level, the quantity does not change. So B is not your answer, C is not your answer, and A is not your answer. Therefore, the only answer left is D. All right, why does this make sense? Think about it. If price changed, the entirety of this curve would either shift upwards or downwards. If price increased, then the entirety of this curve would shift outward, making it very, very responsive to a change in price, would make demand very responsive to a change in price, making it perfectly elastic demand. All right, so that is your answer. Number 8. The table shows the demand and supply schedules for rice. The current price is at $2 per kilo. All right, so $2 per kilo. Let's highlight this as we go. This is the current price. Okay, what will happen if the price is reduced to, so there's a change in price and the price is reduced to 1. Okay, there we go. So there's a change. The price is reduced to $1 per kilo, and therefore there is a reduction in price. What will happen? Okay, let's just first see what are these. So there's the quantity demanded and there's the quantity supplied. At $2 per kilo, the quantity demanded was 10 and the quantity supplied was 25. Therefore, supply was far greater than demand. Therefore, there was a surplus in the economy that was going on. All right, at 1, when the price per kilo is at $1, the quantity demanded increased to 30 and the quantity supplied decreased to 15. Therefore, there's a higher demand, but there is no supply. Therefore, there is a shortage in the economy, right? All right. Now let's look at the answers, the options. The demand schedule would shift to the left. Again, from the last question that we saw, there would not be a shift in the market. because there has been a reduction or a change in price specific to the good. Therefore, if there's anything happens, there it would be a movement. So A is not the answer. The market would move from shortage to surplus. This essentially means that at $2 per kilo, there was a shortage and then it moved to surplus. But we know that when it was at 2, there was actually a surplus, and when it was at 1, there was a shortage. So B is not the answer, and C is something that is the answer, right? Number D is a supply schedule would shift to the right. Again, there would be no shift, therefore A and D are out. So your answer would be number C. The market would move from surplus to shortage. The diagram shows the fixed cost, the variable cost, and the total cost of a firm at output S. Okay, so this is output S, and there is a fixed cost, variable cost, and total cost. Which distance represents the firm's variable cost? Again, it's a very basic diagram. It's not too complicated, but a lot of students have problem understanding the basics more. Hence, we're going to really discuss this in details again. All right. So total cost, variable cost, and fixed cost. So this line that you see, this curve that you see, is your total cost. Is the cost of everything. It is the total cost of production, right? The straight line that is perpendicular to the x-axis is your fixed cost. It's the cost that never changes. No matter at what quantity you supply or not, the fixed cost remains fixed. All right, so that is the horizontal line that you can see. The other line is your variable cost. All right, this curve shows your variable cost at each specific output. Now, this is what the equation is. The total cost is the addition of the fixed cost plus the variable cost. All right, so the difference between the total cost and the variable cost is the addition of fixed cost. Therefore, the total cost, this curve, and this is the variable cost. The difference between the total cost and the variable cost, the total cost and the variable cost, is the addition of fixed cost, the addition of fixed cost that we can see over here, which is the purple line or the purple marked line over here. So if this is the entirety of the total cost and this is the fixed cost, remaining of this, the remaining part would be your variable cost, right? This part would be the amount that's your variable cost. This is the basic understanding of the diagram that is included in your syllabus. Now let's move back. So what distance would represent the firm's variable cost? PQ, as we have seen, PQ is not the variable cost, it is the fixed cost. Is it PS? PS is the total cost of the entire production. Is it QR? QR is not the variable cost. It's neither the fixed cost, it's neither the total cost. D is QS, as we have seen that since PQ is your fixed cost, QS would be your variable cost. So that is your answer. QS. Number 10. What could cause profits to be high in a monopoly market? Okay. A, barriers to entry, which is true. The reason why there is a lot of profits in monopoly market is because there are other firms or other industries. Other firms in that industry cannot enter the market and take market share. Therefore, there is a monopoly market created. So A can be your answer. B, these economies of scale. These economies of scale would be the reason why profit margins in the long run decrease and not increase or not are high. So B is not the answer. C, elastic demand for the product. If the elastic demand for the product does not only apply to the monopoly market, right? The reason why profits are going to be high is because there's only one single seller of the product, not because the demand elasticity is elastic, right? Number D is the high number of substitutes for the product. If there are high number of substitutes for the product, there would not be high profits because people would not want to buy it, and that does not apply for a monopoly market. All right, so the only answer here is A, barriers to entry. 11. Which farm is most likely to be classified as a small farm in the tertiary sector? The first thing that you need to know is what is the tertiary sector. It's the sector that deals with service providing. The sectors are primary sectors, which is agriculture. There's secondary sector, which is manufacturing sector, which deals with those sort of stuff, and the tertiary sector deals with service providing, right? So A is a farm, not true. That's the primary sector. That's the agricultural sector. B, a hairdresser. It does provide service, so B can be your answer. C, a steelworks. It's the manufacturing. It is the manufacturing in sector, so it's the secondary sector. So C, it's not the answer. D is a supermarket. It does provide you service, but it's not just service. It's the supplying of the agricultural goods or the manufacturing goods. So it deals more with the first and second sector. Plus it's a supermarket, so it's not a small farm to begin with. It's not a small farm to begin with. So D is not your answer. So your answer here would be B, a hairdresser. Number 12. Germany is considered a capital-intensive economy, while Indonesia is considered a labor-intensive economy. We do understand what capital-intensive and labor-intensive means, right? So if somebody is capital-intensive, it means they're more reliant on capital goods to provide for to produce certain goods. And if somebody is labor-intensive, they're more reliant on labor for production. All right, what does this mean about the economies of Germany and Indonesia? A is that capital is relatively cheaper than labor in Germany, while labor is relatively cheaper than capital in Indonesia. This is true because the reason why a certain economy would be capital intensive is the opportunity cost of being capital intensive was less than being labor intensive, meaning that capital is relatively cheaper than labor, and vice versa, right? It means that the reason why Indonesia is labor intensive is because it's relatively cheaper. Labor is relatively cheaper than capital in that economy. So A can be your answer. B is that Germany has many primary sector workers, while Indonesia has many tertiary sector workers. If there are more primary sector workers, a country or an economy is more likely to be labor intensive because primary sector workers rely on being very hands-on in the agricultural world, in the fields, in the farms, etc. And therefore B just does not actually make sense. So not B. C is Indonesia has a higher growth in its population size than Germany. Again, just because something has a higher growth in population doesn't mean that it has less opportunity cost in using than capital or labor, etc. Therefore, just because Indonesia has higher population doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be labor intensive. It can also be capital intensive. Therefore, C is not absolutely right. D is relatively more low-cost labor is available in Germany, while capital is more efficient than labor in Indonesia. Untrue. If labor was low cost and available in Germany would not have been capital intensive. It would have been opposite, would have been labor intensive. So D is not the answer. So the answer for number 12 is A. A bank continues to operate loss-making branches. A bank continues to operate loss-making branches. Which objective is the bank trying to achieve? It's not trying to achieve growth, because if it's making loss, it would lose out in growth. It would have less capital to set up further branches in the future. So not growth, not efficiency, because if they are making loss, it means that they are losing out on profits and they're losing out on income that they could have gotten, and they would have reinvested to get higher efficiency. So it's not efficiency, it's not profit maximization, because it's clearly stated they're losing out. They're losing out and they're making a lot more losses. So it's not profit maximization. D is social welfare. So, and it is true, if a bank continues to operate loss-making branches, it means, okay, so a bank profits or loss based on its interest level. So if it's making loss, it means that it has low interest. If it has low interest, it means it's trying to initiate people into borrowing more, right? So it means that it is trying to gain social welfare. All right. So your answer for number 13 is D. 14. The table shows 3 people, X, Y, and Z, and how they spend their income. All right, so X, Y, and Z. The first sector is food, clothing, and housing. The second is entertainment and leisure. And the third is luxury goods. What is the likely order of income from lowest income to highest income for these 3 people? This is a very simple, almost fun sort of MCQ to solve, right? So let's go on. If somebody has the lowest income, they're going to be spending the least amount of money in luxury goods. So person X is spending 35%, person Y is spending 40%, and person Z is spending only 25%. So it's safe to say that person Z has the lowest income. That's just to double check. A low income person would also spend a huge percentage of their income in the basic necessities, for example, food, clothing, and housing. Person X is spending 30%, person Y is spending 25%, and person Z is spending almost 50%. So Z is your lowest income. So your answers are C or D. All right, now let's check for the highest income, right? If a person has the highest income, they're going to be spending the most on luxury goods. So person X spends 35 and person Y spends 40. So 40 is greater. All right. The highest income person would also spend the least amount of their income in basic food, clothes, and necessities, right? So person X is spending 30%, but person Y is only spending 25%. So your highest income person would be person Y. So your answer is C. All right. Number 15. Which activity is correctly linked to the organization that provides it? Okay. Central bank regulate the rate of inflation. It is true. Central bank does regulate the rate of inflation because they are the one who controls the money supply, etc., in the economy. Therefore, central bank does have the obligation to regulate the rate of inflation. The central bank sets direct taxes. This is untrue because the government sets the taxes. The taxes are determined and set by the government, so not the central bank. So it's not B. C is commercial bank manages the government's financial account. The commercial bank are for individual uses, for commercial uses, for businesses, for industries, farms, individual people, etc. So they do not manage anything related to government or the entire country. So C and D are both wrong. So your answer for number 15 is A. Regulate the rate of inflation. The chart shows a government spending in a year. Okay, so this is on millions. Social security, health, education, law and order, defense. Okay. What was the total government spending on public goods? Okay. What are public goods? Public goods are goods that are non-excludable and non-rivalrous. What does that mean? It means that if a certain someone uses a public good, the good does not decrease for if somebody else wants to use it. It means that it's non-rivalrous. For example, if I use good XYZ, it does not decrease the amount you can use of the good XYZ. Therefore, everybody can use the same amount, or however many people using the good available does not decrease it in its quantity. So that's what non-rivalrous means. Now, non-excludable means that you cannot exclude certain people from it. What does that mean? It means like if you set out that good, you cannot say that a certain sector of people would not be able to use it. You cannot exclude a certain sector of people from using it. Anyone or everyone able to and willing to would be able to use or reap benefits out of that specific good. With that being said, that's a basic understanding of what a public good is. So, what are public goods? Health and education are not public goods because, as we have already talked about, I think in the first MCQ, these are both limited in supply. Therefore, if I use it, it means that somebody else would not be able to use it. There is a limited amount of institutions that provide health care and education. So if somebody uses it, it decreases the amount available for others. So health and education are not it. Law and order and defense, these two are things that you cannot stop anyone from using. Law and order, policies, etc. is something that's available for everyone, and these never diminish in its quantity, so it's always there. So does defense, right? It never decreases because the defense is something that you give out to the entire country. Again, it's also not excludable. You cannot exclude anyone from not reaping benefits of law and order and not reaping benefits of defense. Again, defense, when they talk about defense, they talk about defense force for the entire country. For example, your army, right? It's the defense for the entire country. So these two are definitely public goods. Now, is social security and welfare a public good? This is a question, or this is a confusion that many students have. A social security and welfare, they come from tax revenues. They come from government budget. Therefore, if you give out social security and welfare to a certain group, it means that your total budget would decrease because you would have to spend from your total budget, and therefore these are rivalrous in nature, right? These are rivalrous in nature, and therefore they are not considered to be public goods. Therefore, your only public goods are law and order and defense. So you just add 5050 to 2390, which I think I have the calculator over here somewhere. Oh, cool. Found it. Seven four four zero. Your answer is C. Okay. Number 17. A government levies a specific tax on the supply of cigarettes. At the same time, it starts a campaign to explain the health risk of smoking. Which diagram illustrates the effects on the demand and supply of a cigarette? Okay, let's try to understand the question that is being said. A government levies a specific tax. So there has to be a change in supply. So there's going to be a change in supply. At the same time, it starts a campaign to explain the health risks. It means that people are going to be more aware of the health risks of smoking cigarettes, and therefore the demand would also shift because it's a awareness is a non-price factor of a non-price determinant of demand, right? So there would be a shift. So immediately, as we can see, A and B are not your answers because the demand is not shifting or is not shown to be shifting in A and B. All right, so it's not A and it's not B. Okay, so now whether it's C or whether it's D. All right, so let's look at these specific. If a government levies a specific tax on the supply of cigarettes, therefore, a specific tax would mean that the supply of cigarettes would decrease, because there's going to be a higher cost of production. Therefore, the supply is going to shift to the left, or in this case, almost upwards. All right, so this is your answer. Over here, we can see that the supply is shifting downwards or shifting to the right, and therefore there has been an increase in supply. And over here, we can see that there has been a decrease in supply. This is going to be your answer because there has been a decrease in supply. Just to double check if the demand also lines up, is that at the same time it starts a campaign to explain the health risks. It means that the demand is also decreasing. So the demand would also shift to the left. Both of them shifting to the left is something that we can see here, because S is moving to S2, which is left, and D is moving to D2, which is also the left in this regard, right? So the answer for this question would be number C. A government wishes to pursue an expansionary monetary policy. What is an expansionary monetary policy? These are monetary policies which are set out with the aim and incentive of increasing the aggregate demand in the economy. All right, what would it do? Would it discourage bank lending? If it discourages bank lending, people would borrow less, and if people borrowed less, people would spend less, people would demand less, there's going to be a decrease in the aggregate demand. Therefore, A is not your answer. Then we have it gives subsidies to a farm. If it gives subsidies to a farm, to farms, it would mean that there's going to be subsidies aren't necessarily a monetary policy to begin with. So first and foremost, this is not, part of an expansionary monetary policy. So B is also not your answer. C is the lower income tax threshold. Again, a lower income tax is also not a monetary policy. This is fiscal policy, and number B is supply side policy. So not B, not C. These are not monetary policies. D is lower interest rate. This is a monetary policy, but does it is it expansionary? Does it increase the aggregate demand? Let's look about it. If there are lower interest rates, it means that borrowing is cheaper. The cost of borrowing is interest rates, and if the cost is lower, people would borrow more. Just like the first one, the same explanation as the first one. If people are going to borrow more, people would have more money or more disposable income in their hands. People will be able to demand more and buy more. There's going to be more consumer spendings. There's going to be more demand for imports, etc. So a lower interest rate is an expansionary monetary policy. So D is your answer. Number 19. A government introduces a series of economic measures. What is a supply side policy measure? Okay, building more affordable homes to improve labor mobility. This is a supply side policy because it supplies the building, etc. It's not fiscal, or it's not monetary policy. So A might be your answer. B is controlling consumer spending to reduce inflation. This is a monetary policy that controls spending. It's not a supply side policy. C, lowering interest rates to encourage purchase of an expensive good. Again, C is not a supply side policy. It is indeed a monetary policy. Number D is raising pensions to help retired people to pay their fuel bills. Again, it's not a supply side policy, so your only answer here would be A. This is a fairly simple MCQ.
Okay.
What is identified as an economic growth? A fall in labor productivity. That's not economic growth is just the increase in the productive capacity of the economy. Economic growth is an increase in the productive capacity of the economy. That's the basic definition of what economic growth is. So the answer for number 20 is B. Okay. The retail trade in a country has unemployed workers in one region and job vacancies in another region. What could explain this? Cost of employing workers are lower when there is unemployment. Cost of a retail trade in a country has unemployed workers in one region, and job vacancies in another region. Okay. Cost of employing workers are lower when there is unemployment. No. If there is unemployment, the cost of workers would be lower, but it does not explain why there's going to be unemployed workers in one region and job vacancies in the other region, right? So A is not your answer. B is it's more expensive to live in the area where retail jobs are available. This does make sense because if the job vacancies are the area where retail jobs are available, but since there aren't workers there, people cannot, since it's more expensive, people cannot move there. So there's not enough workers in these areas. So B does make sense. C, retailing demands the same skills everywhere. It does not explain why there's going to be vacancies in one and unemployment in the other region, right? Geographical mobility of labor has increased. If there's a geographical mobility increase, it means that these places would not be vacant. The jobs would not be vacant as people will be able to move more. So D is not the answer. Therefore, 21 the answer is B. Okay. A country wishes to reduce the level of inflation. Which combination of policy measures would be most successful? Okay, think about it. It's talking about most successful, so most probably there's going to be more than one right answer. All right. A is that there's going to be a decrease in exchange rate. It's the level of inflation, right? If there's a decrease in exchange rate, your value of money would your value of money would decrease. If your value of money decreases, there's going to be an increase in the inflation, as because you would have to pay more for the same product, right? Because the value of money has decreased. So it's not A. B, a decrease in interest rate. Okay. If there is a decrease in interest rate, it would mean that people would borrow more. There's going to be more supply of money in the economy. If there's more supply of money in the economy, again, the level of the value of money would decrease. So there might be a high level of inflation. The next policy over here is that there's going to be an increased exchange rates. This is the this would if this alone would have executed in the economy, it might have achieved to reduce the level of inflation. However, with the first policy measure, this combination would not reduce, or more likely is not likely to reduce the level of inflation, right? Okay. An increase in government spending, a decrease in the interest rates. Again, due to the decrease in interest rates, there's not going to be a reduction in the level of inflation. There's going to be an increase in the level of inflation. Plus, with more government spending, there's going to be even more money supply in the market. Therefore, there's going to be even higher inflation rates. So C is not the answer. Okay, if there's an increase in interest rates, people would borrow less. There's going to be less money in the economy. Plus, the decrease in government spending would also lead to less money being circulated in the economy, both of which would increase the essential value of money, therefore reducing the level of inflation. Therefore, your answer would be D. Okay. Number 23. A government wants to reduce both its budget deficit and the amount of poverty in its country. A budget deficit means that it does not have enough tax revenues, right? It's spending more than it's gaining from tax revenues or any other form of revenues. And the amount of poverty in its country, we know what poverty means. Which fiscal policy measure is most likely to achieve both of these aims? All right. If there's a decreasing the rate of progressive if there's a decreasing in the rate of progressive income, it would mean that people a decrease in the rate of income tax would mean that there's going to be less budget revenue. Therefore, the budget deficit would not reduce. Therefore, this aim would not, fulfill. Therefore, A is not your answer. Decreasing government spending on welfare benefit. Decreasing government welfare benefits would lead to even greater amount of poverty in the country. So it does not get reduced. Therefore, this aim does not get solved. C is increasing the rate of progressive income tax. This can be true because if there is an increase in the rate of tax, there's going to be more tax revenues. Therefore, the budget deficit would reduce. Plus, if you reinvest there's going to be if you reinvest the money that you get from the tax revenue, you could give more welfare benefits to reduce the amount of poverty. Not only that, since it's progressive income tax, it means that the burden would be more on the richer portion of your economy than the poorer. Therefore, the amount of poverty would not deteriorate in that sense. So C can be your answer. Increasing government spending on welfare benefits. Increasing this would lead to a reduction in poverty because people would now have more money due to the welfare benefits. However, it's more government spending and it's just government spending. Therefore, budget deficit would not get reduced. Instead, it would get increased. So the only answer here is C, the increasing the rate of progressive income tax. Which components, in addition to the gross domestic product GDP per head, are included in the Human Development Index, HDI? A lot of people confuse on this question as well. We're going to look in detail as to what the Human Development Index is. All right. So this is the Human Development Index is just an alternative measure of the living standards, and this is measured through 3 different sectors. All right, so there's healthcare, there's education, and there's the income level. The income level is what the GDP of a country is. So the other 2 would be, and this is what it's mentioned in the stimulus over here. In addition to the gross domestic product or GDP per head, the other 2 is healthcare and education, and this is something that a lot of people or a lot of students often confuse on. All right. So which components, in addition to the gross domestic product GDP per head, are included in the Human Development Index, HDI? A, average earnings and inequalities of income. No. B is the balance of trade and balance of payments. Also no. Life expectancy at birth. Life expectancy at birth and expected years of schooling. It does deal with health and it does deal with education. So C can be your answer. D, the size of population. The age structure. No. So the answer here would be C, life expectancy at birth and expected years of schooling. 25. What is likely to cause an immediate decrease in the size of the labor force? A fall in the average size of families. This would not decrease the size of labor force because even if there are smaller families, the number of people would be same. Therefore, the labor force would not be decreased. A fall in birth rate. This would lead to a decrease in labor force, but it would not lead to an immediate decrease. It would lead to a decrease in the long run. So not B. C, a reduction in the age of retirement. A reduction in the age of retirement means that the age of retirement, let's say, which is at 65, would be reduced to, let's say, 60. Which means everyone within 60 to 65 who would have been considered a part of the labor force would be no longer part of the labor force. Therefore, it would be an immediate decrease in the size of the labor force. So C is your answer. Lastly, an increase in net immigration. It's not your answer. It's not your answer, right? So C, 25 is your answer. It would not lead to an immediate decrease in the size of the labor force. Therefore, D is not your answer. 26. The table shows some economic indicators. Which increase in the first indicator is most likely to lead to an increase in the second indicator? All right, for number A, we have budget surplus as the first indicator. What does budget surplus essentially mean? It means when the government has a greater number of tax revenues or just revenue in general than it is spending currently. If there is an increase in budget surplus, it means that government is just having even more addition to its revenue in its bank than it is spending. Will that lead to consumer saving? In a very complicated sense, the answer is yes. If there is a budget surplus, government in the future would have more money that they can spend. There would be an increase in government spending. If there's an increase in government spending in places, for example, like people are getting subsidies, or things are getting subsidized, or education is getting subsidized, and things like this, if something like that, if the government decides to spend on such sectors, consumers will not need to spend as much, therefore they can save their money. So it can lead to consumer savings, but there's the reason why A isn't, your answer most probably, is because the link from budget surplus to consumer saving is very, very complicated, right? Your budget surplus would have to lead to an increase in government spending, and that would lead to people saving, and it's far more complicated. So A is not the answer. B is consumer spending and unemployment. If there is a if there's a higher consumer spending, will that increase unemployment? The answer is no. If there is a higher consumer spending, there would be higher demand. And to meet that high demand, producers would need a high number of workers to supply a higher supply, right? So therefore, there would not be an increase in unemployment. The opposite would happen. There would be a decrease in unemployment. So B is not the answer. Number C is inflation and trade surplus. All right, what happens during an inflation? During an inflation, your value of money decreases, prices of everything gets increased, and your value of money decreases. If the price of your goods and products increase, they become not competitive anymore in the international market. Therefore, your demand for exports would decrease. Trade surplus is the net export that you're doing, right? So if your exports decrease, there definitely would not be an increase in trade surplus. There would be a decrease in trade surplus. Therefore, your inflation would not lead to an increase in trade surplus. So C is not the answer. D is the first indicator is productivity, and the second indicator is living standards. As we know that productivity is a factor through which living standards are measured, right? So an increase in productivity will lead to a direct increase in living standards, and there is no middle steps to it. If there's an increase in productivity, since productivity is a measure of living standards, it is a factor of living standards, the direct factor of living standards, your living standards would directly increase without any buts and ifs. So D is your answer. All right. 27. The price of a currency in a fixed exchange system is reduced. What is this called? This is a very simple MCQ. However, a lot of students confuse on the terms between appreciation and depreciation and devaluation and revaluation. All right, for this, we're all going back to the doc, right? So the exchange rate is just, the exchange rate essentially is where you measure the price of one currency in terms of another currency or a basket of other currencies, right? And there are two ways you can do this. One is the floating exchange rate, and the second is the fixed exchange rate. In the floating exchange rate, the price of the currency is not predetermined. All right, the market forces of demand and supply set the value, and this is why it is said to appreciate and depreciate, right? Why do we use these words? Even in simple English, appreciation and depreciation is something that happens, it's something that happens naturally. Nothing is causing it, or nothing is forcing it to appreciate. You just naturally appreciate or you naturally depreciate in value, right? Therefore, in the floating exchange system, since nothing is predetermined and the government is not involved in setting the set values and prices, it just naturally happens, and we term the increase in price as appreciation and the decrease in price as depreciation. All right. However, in a system where it is predetermined by the government, the value does not naturally appreciate and depreciate. It is forced to do so, or the price is forced to be raised or forced to be decreased in the market. Therefore, they are reevaluated. They're reevaluated by the government, or they're devalued by the government, and that is why these terms are being used in a fixed exchange rate, right? So that is something that you would want, and that is something how you can remember why these two would be different from these two. Going back to the question, they're talking about a fixed exchange rate, right? So as we see here, in a fixed exchange rate, we talk about reevaluation and devaluation. All right, so if the price of a currency in a fixed exchange rate is reduced, then therefore it would lead to C. It would lead to devaluation because there's a reduction and it's in a fixed exchange rate, so there's going to be a reduction. So it's 27C. Okay. 28. A government removed the quota on goods imported into the country. What is most likely result of this? A quota is the number of imports that you can, is the number of goods that you can import into the country, right? A quota on imports. A decrease in the demand for domestic production. So since they removed the quota, this is something that can happen, right? Since they removed the quota, it means that now people can import far more. Before, there was a limit on the number that they could have imported. After removing the limit, people can import far more. Therefore, it can cause a decrease in demand for domestic products if the imports are cheaper. So A can be your answer. B, a decrease in domestic unemployment. Not true. Almost the opposite can happen. Because there is going to be more imports, there needs to be less domestic supply within the market. Therefore, people might get unemployed, or there might be an increase in unemployment in the currency. A decrease in exports. A removal on quota does not have any direct link to exports. It does have link if in a more complicated sense, but since we're talking about a more likely result, we are not going to consider C as an option. D, a decrease in the balance of trade deficit. If there is a trade deficit, it means you're already importing more. Right. A decrease in the balance of trade deficit means that you're going to export more, or the imports are going to stop. A removal on quota would not decrease the trade deficit, it would increase the trade deficit. Therefore, D is not the answer. Your only answer here is A, a decrease in the demand for domestic production. 29. What is most likely to result from a reduction in the value of a country's currency if there is no other changes in the economy? A trade in goods surplus will fall. All right. If there is a reduction in the value of a country's currency, it means that there is inflation. Therefore, it would lead to higher prices for exports, and therefore there would be a trade in goods surplus will fall, right? But however, the problem here is it's very complicated. It isn't like the most natural thing to happen. Okay, that's first. B is export prices will rise. As I said before, this is also true. Export prices will rise. However, is it the most likely result among all the 4 options that you were given? Number C is import prices will rise. And number D is inflation rate will fall. We know that the inflation rate will not fall. Instead, it will rise because, there's a reduction in the country's currency. So D is not the answer, but A, B, and C are all somewhat true. Now, why is C, therefore, then the answer, right? A trade in goods surplus is something that's more complicated, and in export prices will rise, and that's not a result that would happen within the economy. It's a cost or the price would, and this would affect the international trade and not within the economy. Therefore, B is not the answer. So therefore, the answer is C. Because when there is a reduction in the value of a country's currency, it would immediately lead to the import prices rising, and people would have to pay that price, and it would affect the people immediately, almost immediately, rather than the trade in goods or the export prices. Therefore, C is your answer. Lastly, the government of low-income countries often allow foreign multinational companies or MNCs to mine minerals in their country. Which conflict between benefit and cost might this cause the low income countries? Okay, allow multinational companies to mine minerals. All right. So the benefit would be, would that improve the trade-off balance? And the cost would be trading by MNCs. Trading by MNCs is not a cost, so A would not be your answer. Benefit is higher employment. Cost is the loss of finite resource. Both of these make sense, right? There is going to be benefit because there's going to be higher employment. If there's going to be more companies coming in, there's going to be a need for more workers. There's going to be job vacancies, so there's going to be higher employment. The cost, however, would be the loss of finite resource. Finite resource are resources which you cannot, it's a one-time supply, and mine minerals within the country is a one-time supply. There's a finite supply of it. You cannot increase supply as if it diminishes. So that is going to be a cost. So B would be your answer. C is increased profits for the MNCs. That's not a benefit to the country, so C is not your answer. More sustainable development. This is, however, not true, right? If you're getting development through multinational companies mining finite resources in your country, that's not a sustainable development. That's a non-sustainable or not a sustainable form of development, and that is not a benefit. So it's not D. Your answer for number 30 would be B. With that, we finished the entirety of this paper. If you guys still have questions, feel free to contact us at ACE Academy. I hope you all understood the explanations. Good luck for your preparations for O-levels.